A billionaire stood in shock as a little girl pulled him from his wedding. But 5 seconds later, the tug at the altar, the priest hadn't even finished the word husband when a thunderous crash paralyzed the 500 guests. It wasn't a murmur or a discreet interruption. It was the brutal, dry, and deafening bang of the cathedral's heavy cedar doors slamming against the century-old stone walls. The echo bounced off the dome, cutting the breath of Sydney's elite. Lachlan Maxwell, the man who wouldn't flinch at multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, turned his head with the same slow motion as everyone else. What he saw in the church's doorway made no sense. It didn't fit into his world of calculated perfection, tailored suits, and strategic alliances. It was a girl, barely 6 years old. She stood under the imposing arch of the entrance, trembling, breathing with a wild agitation that puffed out her chest. Her hair, a sea of tight dark curls, was tangled with dry leaves and dust. But what made the guests gasp in horror was her dress. What might once have been a light cotton garment was now a crust of dark, thick, wet mud, dripping directly onto the pristine checkered marble floor of the church. "What is this?" Genevieve whispered from behind Lachlan. Her voice, always sweet, always controlled, now had a metallic edge, a vibration of contained rage that Lachlan had never heard from her. But Lachlan didn't answer. He couldn't. He was rooted to the spot, hypnotized by the figure who had just burst into his wedding. The girl didn't stay static. Her wide eyes scanned the crowd, ignoring the horrified faces of politicians and entrepreneurs in the pews. She was looking for someone, and then her gaze met Lachlan's at the altar. The physical impact of that look hit the billionaire with the force of a head-on collision. He felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't possible. The color of those eyes, the way they looked at him with a mixture of absolute terror and desperate hope, were a ghost he himself had buried in a sealed coffin 7 years ago. Without a second's hesitation, the girl started to run. Her bare, mud-covered feet slapped the black and white floor with a frantic cadence. Splish, splash, splush, leaving a trail of dirt, desecrating the invisible carpet of perfection that Genevieve had orchestrated. She passed the carved wooden pews, adorned with delicate clouds of white flowers, shattering the sepulchral silence of the venue with the sound of her ragged breathing. Lachlan's private security, men trained to neutralize armed threats, froze at the absurdity of the scene. Who stops a 6-year-old girl covered in mud in the middle of a religious ceremony? "Stop her," Genevieve hissed, finally losing her composure. Her hand, encased in white lace, closed on Lachlan's arm like a claw. But it was too late. The girl reached the foot of the altar, ignoring the steps. She lunged directly towards Lachlan, dodging the scandalized priest who stepped back. She crashed against the groom's legs with the force of a frightened animal. Her hands, small and stained with black, greasy earth, clung desperately to the impeccable fabric of Lachlan's navy suit. The mud instantly stained the Italian wool, ruining the $1,000 attire in a fraction of a second. Lachlan looked down, paralyzed. He felt the coldness of the girl's hands through the fabric of his trousers. He felt the dampness of the mud. He felt the whole world stop spinning. The girl lifted her face to him. She was crying, but making no sound. Tears carved clean streaks on her dirty cheeks. Her green eyes, those eyes that haunted him in his worst nightmares, pierced him through and through. Then she tugged at him. It wasn't a soft brush. It was a violent, demanding pull, laden with life-or-death urgency. The girl stood on tiptoes, brought her face close to the billionaire's chest, and with a hoarse, broken voice that only he could hear above the incipient chaos, whispered 3 sentences that destroyed Lachlan Maxwell's universe. The fire lied. "Clara is alive. You have to run." 5 seconds later, time stood still. Literally, Lachlan's brain collapsed under the weight of the impossibility, fragmenting reality into an agonizing slow motion. It was exactly 5 seconds. 5 heartbeats that rewrote his existence. Second one, denial. The fire lied. The phrase resonated in his skull like an alarm bell. His mind rejected the information. Clara was dead. He saw the charred car at the bottom of the ravine on the road to the Blue Mountains. He saw the ashes. He signed the death certificate. This girl couldn't be saying that. It was a cruel joke, a psychological attack from some business rival. It had to be. Second two, the evidence. Lachlan looked down, trying to push the girl away to demand answers, but looking closely at her, the denial fractured. The shape of her jaw, the rebellious curl that fell over her left eye. And those eyes, my God, those eyes weren't similar, they were exactly the same. They were Clara's eyes, and the girl was 6 years old. The accident was 7 years ago. The maths delivered a devastating blow to his stomach. If Clara was pregnant, when the car went over. Second 3. The mask shatters. The stunned silence of the church broke. Murmurs turned into exclamations of outrage. The priest stammered, but it was the movement beside him that brought Lachlan back to earthly reality. Genevieve Holloway was not acting like a surprised or frightened bride. Her hand, the same one that was to receive the wedding ring, dug into Lachlan's forearm with unnatural force. Her long painted nails pierced the white shirt under his jacket, seeking to wound. Lachlan turned his face to her. He expected to see confusion, but found a predator. Genevieve's face was contorted into a grimace of icy, pure, calculated fury. She wasn't looking at Lachlan. She was looking at the girl with a hatred so deep, so lethal, that it made the billionaire's blood run cold. "Kill her," Genevieve whispered, her lips barely moving in a hiss, not directed at Lachlan, but at someone else. Second 4. The threat. Lachlan's survival instinct, the same one that had made him the king of industry in the north of the country, activated like a spring. He followed Genevieve's line of sight. First row, the bride's side. A man Lachlan had assumed was a distant relative of Genevieve's, a bloke in a grey suit with a faint scar on his neck. The man wasn't looking surprised. His face was stone. While the rest of the guests clapped their hands over their mouths, the man in the grey suit slid his right hand inside his jacket towards his armpit holster. The movement was fast, professional. Blackened steel gleamed under the light of the stained glass windows, a weapon with a silencer screwed onto the barrel, and it wasn't pointing at Lachlan. It was raising the barrel directly at the head of the girl, still clinging to the groom's leg. Genevieve Holloway had ordered an execution in the middle of her own wedding. Second 5. The explosion. Everything clicked into place in a fraction of a second. The speed with which Genevieve reacted. The hitman in the first row, the mud on the girl. The phrase "Clara is alive." Genevieve knew. Genevieve always knew. His entire life for the last 7 years was an invisible prison, a macabre charade orchestrated by the woman in white beside him. And the only proof of that charade, the only connection to the love of his life, was about to get a bullet to the head in less than a second. Diplomacy died right there. The Lachlan, the businessman, disappeared, replaced by something more primitive and violent. With a sharp, savage movement, Lachlan ripped his arm from Genevieve's grip, pushing her back. The force of the movement tore the delicate French silk veil with a rough sound, and the bride stumbled against the priest, losing her balance. At the same time, Lachlan bent down. He didn't try to reason. He didn't shout for security. He didn't ask questions. His large, strong hands grabbed the girl, wrapping around her small, mud-covered shoulders. He felt the little ones trembling. "Hold on tight!" he yelled a hand's breadth from her face. The billionaire suddenly straightened up, lifting the girl off the ground for an instant to turn on his own axis, placing himself as a human shield between her and the first row. A dull sound, like a compressed air spit, brushed past Lachlan's ear. The projectile impacted one of the altar's floral arrangements, exploding the white flowers in a shower of shattered petals. No one heard the shot over the chaos of screams, but Lachlan felt the wind of the bullet. It was real. They were going to be massacred right there. "Run, run, run!" Lachlan roared, taking Ruby's small, muddy hand with an iron grip. And they ran, not towards the sacristy, not towards the altar. They ran straight ahead, directly down the central aisle, in the opposite direction from the altar, towards the main doors through which the girl had just entered. Panic erupted in St. Mary's Cathedral, Sydney. The guests finally reacted to the chaos, but didn't know what they were fleeing from. Women in designer dresses screamed, tripping over their own heels. Businessmen instinctively ducked without knowing why. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of the crowd trying to get out of the way. Lachlan dragged Ruby, or perhaps she dragged him. The image was a visual delirium. The city's most powerful man, his face distorted by panic, and his suit ruined, running at full speed hand in hand with a barefoot, mud-blackened girl, both dodging horrified guests. The blur of the race, the warm candlelight crashing against the frantic movement of their bodies. Behind them, at the high altar, Genevieve Holloway had straightened up. There was no longer any trace of the perfect bride. Her white dress was trampled, her veil torn. She stood before the marble altar, watching her empire and her deception flee through the grand door. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply made a sharp gesture with her hand towards the man in the grey suit and towards 3 other guests who suddenly stood up in unison in different parts of the church. The hunt had begun, and Lachlan only had a little girl's hand to guide him in the darkness, the hiding place of the guilty. The cathedral's central aisle had become a tunnel of collective hysteria. The guests' faces were blurry stains of panic rushing past as Lachlan Maxwell dragged the mud-covered girl. Voices merged into a single deafening shriek. Women in haute couture dresses pushed each other, trampling floral arrangements and spilled pearls. Men who minutes before spoke of million-dollar investments now clambered over mahogany pews like cornered animals, trying to flee an invisible threat. Lachlan didn't look back, but his ears, sharpened by adrenaline, caught the unmistakable sound of danger. Another muffled thud. Brutal. A piece of the checkered marble floor exploded into 1,000 pieces of white shrapnel just centimeters from his left shoe. A silenced projectile. They weren't shooting in the air to scare. They were shooting to kill in the middle of a crowd of 500 people, and the target was the head of the girl clutching his hand. The immense cedar main doors seemed miles away. The human bottleneck of desperate guests blocked the exit. Going out that way was a tactical suicide. They would be a static target trapped in the mob. This way, Lachlan bellowed, giving Ruby's arm a sharp tug. The billionaire turned violently to the left, leaving the central aisle and entering the dark side nave. He tripped over a marble statue, feeling his jacket tear, but didn't stop. His mind worked 1,000 miles an hour, processing architectural plans instead of contracts. He knew the cathedral. He had paid for the complete restoration of the roof 2 years ago at Genevieve's insistence. Genevieve. 10 meters away, hidden in the gloom among the carved wooden confessionals, was the heavy double door leading to the sacristy and the internal clerical passages. "Run, don't look back, don't stop," he ordered the girl, whose breathing was already an agonizing wheeze. Ruby wasn't crying, but her legs trembled from the superhuman effort. They left trails of black mud, mixed with blood, from her bare feet on the cold stone. A third shot impacted the wood of a confessional, just as they crossed in front of it, splintering the old varnish. Lachlan pushed the girl with his shoulder, throwing both of them against the sacristy door. The old iron hardware groaned with a metallic screech. They fell inside, rolling onto the terracotta floor. The change was drastic. From blinding light, deafening noise, and the crowd, they went to dense darkness, claustrophobic silence, and a strong smell of stale incense, melted wax, and old wood. Lachlan didn't lose half a second. He sprang to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his knees, and closed the heavy cedar door. He slid the enormous wrought iron bolt just as a body crashed furiously against the other side of the wood. The blow made the walls vibrate. Someone tried to turn the handle frantically, but the ancient metal held. They were locked in, safe for a few minutes, but trapped. The billionaire leaned against the door, panting, feeling his heart was going to pierce his sternum. Cold sweat soaked his ruined shirt. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, trying to kickstart his brain, trying to process the absolute madness that had just detonated his life. In the gloom, barely illuminated by the filtered light from a tall stained glass window, he spotted the girl. Ruby was huddled under an immense cedar table where priests prepared chalices. She trembled like a leaf in a storm, hugging her knees. The mud covering her was drying, forming a cracked shell on her skin. Lachlan took a step towards her. His shoes crunched on the old floor. "Who?" His voice failed him. It sounded hoarse, broken. "Who sent you? Who are you?" The girl lifted her face. In the darkness, her green eyes shone with a supernatural intensity. She didn't answer with words. Her small, dirty hands rummaged desperately in the inner pocket of her muddy dress. She struggled to pull out something stuck in the damp fabric. Finally, she succeeded. She stretched her trembling arm towards Lachlan, offering him an object that fit in the palm of his hand. Lachlan knelt slowly, feeling the air in the sacristy become unbreathable. He extended his hand. The girl dropped the object onto the billionaire's palm. It was heavy, metallic. Lachlan reached into his left trouser pocket and pulled out his mobile phone. He turned on the torch with clumsy fingers. The beam of white light cut through the darkness and hit the object in his hand directly. Lachlan Maxwell's entire world stopped for a second time in less than 10 minutes. His lungs paralyzed. A dull hum flooded his ears, drowning out the banging that was starting to resonate again against the blocked door. In his hand lay a thick silver chain, blackened and partially melted. Hanging from it was an engagement ring. The main diamond had exploded from the extreme heat, leaving only an empty, deformed setting. But the inside of the platinum band, protected by the metal's curve, remained intact. Lachlan didn't need to read the inscription, but the light illuminated the laser-engraved letters. Clara plus Lachi. It was Clara's ring, the ring he himself had thrown into the mahogany urn before it was sealed. The ring that was supposed to be resting in the Maxwell family mausoleum under 3 meters of marble. The oxygen disappeared from the room. Lachlan collapsed backwards, falling to sit on the terracotta floor. The phone slipped from his hand, illuminating the vaulted ceiling and casting monstrous shadows on the walls. "No, it can't be," he whispered, his voice choked by a knot of pure terror and agony. I closed the urn. I saw her remains. I buried her. The fire lied. The girl repeated from the table with a thread of a voice that cut like a scalpel. She said to give you that. She said only you knew about the ashes. Lachlan looked up. The sidelight from the phone illuminated half of the girl's muddy face. The truth crushed him with the force of a landslide. Clara was not in that car. Clara did not die charred on the road to the Blue Mountains that morning. And if Clara was not in that car, whose remains had he mourned for 7 years? And worse still, who was this girl fleeing from? The truth in the mud. Lachlan crawled across the floor, closing the distance to the girl. He grabbed her shoulders, not with violence, but with a feverish intensity. His large hands stained the cuffs of his shirt with mud. He no longer cared about the suit. He no longer cared about the wedding. He no longer cared about the empire of steel and glass he had built in Sydney. Only the deformed ring in his pocket and the terrified green eyes looking at him existed. "Tell me," Lachlan demanded, staring at her from a few centimeters away. "Tell me right now. Where is she? Where is my wife? What's your name?" The girl swallowed with difficulty. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "My name is Ruby," she stammered, tears carving new streaks in the grime on her cheeks. She's in the place with the cold walls, the old sanatorium, where it smells of bad medicine." Lachlan's brain processed the information like an overloaded computer. The old sanatorium. The Holloway family, Genevieve's family, had made their original fortune in the healthcare sector. They owned dozens of properties, but there was an abandoned psychiatric clinic on the outskirts of the city, on the Pacific Highway, that Genevieve always refused to sell. She said it was historical family heritage. "They had you locked in there?" Lachlan asked, feeling a dark, thick, homicidal rage begin to boil in his blood. Ruby nodded frantically. "We were always there, in the basement, no windows, just the ceiling light. Mom always cried when she heard the white lady's footsteps." The white lady. Genevieve. Lachlan closed his eyes tightly, feeling nauseous. The world's most macabre puzzle was assembling itself in his mind, piece by piece. Genevieve was Clara's best friend. It was Genevieve who called him that night, crying, saying Clara's car had gone over a cliff. It was Genevieve who handled the paperwork because he was sedated in a hospital, destroyed by grief. It was Genevieve who identified the burned bracelet on the unrecognizable body. It was Genevieve who comforted him for years, who became his partner, his confidante, his life support, and finally, his fiancée. Genevieve didn't save her. Genevieve kidnapped her, faked her death, stole her life, locked her in a concrete dungeon for 7 years, and built a throne on the living corpse of her best friend. "How did you get out?" Lachlan asked, his voice trembling with contained fury. He opened his eyes and now there was no panic in them. There was ice, pure and absolute ice. Today there was a lot of noise," Ruby explained, speaking very fast, stumbling over her words. "The gods, mostly left to come to the big party. Mum broke a bathroom pipe a long time ago. She was digging the dirt. Today she made a big hole. She pushed me through the dirty water pipe. She didn't fit. She was very thin, but she didn't fit. She told me, 'Follow the dirty water to the river, then run along the highway until you see the church with the tall spires. Look for the man in the blue suit. Give him the fire ring. He will save you.'" Ruby clung to Lachlan's ruined shirt, digging her little fingers into the fabric. "She said they would kill me if they saw me," the girl sobbed, momentarily losing the courage that had kept her standing. "I ran a lot. I hid in the back of a vegetable truck. Then I ran more. When I came in here, the white lady saw me. Her eyes were scary." Lachlan hugged the girl, pressed her against his chest with unbreakable protective force, not caring about the dirt, the mud, or the smell of dampness and sewage emanating from her. She was Clara's daughter. By her age, by the relentless maths of time, she was his daughter, the daughter Genevieve had stolen from him and kept rotting in an underground dungeon to secure the empire. A brutal thud brought him back to reality. Bang! The solid cedar sacristy door bowed inward. Dust fell from the stone frame. Someone was using something very heavy, perhaps a solid wooden kneeler or a statue as a battering ram against the door. The iron bolt creaked, groaning under the brute force. Splinters began to fly. "Open the door, you bastards!" A hoarse voice roared from the other side. It wasn't church security, it was one of the hitmen in the gray suit. Bang, another shake. The wood cracked in the center with a sinister snap. It wouldn't withstand 3 more blows. Lachlan sprang to his feet, lifting Ruby into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The frightened, confused businessman had died. The man who had just been born in that dark room was a monster, ready to unleash hell on earth to reclaim what was his. He reached into his pocket, squeezing the deformed ring until the metal dug into his skin. With his other hand, he lifted his phone, illuminating the back wall of the sacristy. He searched among the huge mahogany wardrobes where liturgical vestments were kept. He knew what he was looking for. There had to be an exit. The architecture of colonial cathedrals always had clerical escape routes during earlier periods of unrest. His eyes caught a strange relief behind an immense tapestry embroidered with gold threads depicting the Virgin. Crack. The main sacristy door gave way halfway. A black leather boot kicked the splintered gap, trying to reach the latch from outside. Through the hole, Lachlan saw the icy gleam of the silenced pistol peeking through. "Time's up, Maxwell," the man growled from the other side, pushing the barrel of the weapon through the broken wood. "The boss wants the brat's head. If you hand her over, maybe she'll let you live to sign the will." Lachlan didn't reply. He turned off his phone's torch, plunging the room into absolute darkness. He ran towards the golden tapestry, dragging Ruby towards the cold stone wall. His hand frantically felt the edges of the wall behind the heavy fabric, searching for the hidden mechanism, while the hitman finished smashing the main door's lock with kicks. The hunt had just leveled up, and the billionaire was no longer the prey, he was vengeance incarnate. The shattered mask, the chaos in the main nave of the cathedral, had reached a boiling point. The 500 guests, Sydney's financial and political elite, pushed towards the enormous cedar main doors, seeking to flee the blind terror that had erupted. However, the wrought iron fittings didn't give way. The doors were locked from the inside, and Genevieve Holloway, standing before the white marble altar, no longer looked like an abandoned bride. With a cold, calculated movement, she ripped off what remained of her French silk veil and let it fall onto the trampled petals. Her face, which minutes before radiated rehearsed sweetness, was now a granite mask. Her eyes, dark and empty, scanned the terrified crowd with the disdain of someone observing insects trapped in a jar. She raised her right hand. She didn't have to shout. From among the guests, a dozen men in formal suits, but with overly loose cuts. They stopped feigning panic. They pulled out short firearms, compact submachine guns they had managed to smuggle in, bypassing the external security ring. Within seconds, they took tactical positions at each exit, in the side naves, and in front of the altar. "Silence," Genevieve ordered. Her voice wasn't a shout, but it resonated through the altar microphones, cutting through the collective hysteria like an ice blade. "If anyone takes out a phone, I'll break their hands. If anyone screams, I'll blow their head off. Everyone sit down." A sepulchral silence, dense and laden with terror, fell over the cathedral. The guests obeyed slowly, sitting in the mahogany pews, trembling under the barrels of the weapons. Genevieve descended the altar steps. Her white heels echoed on the checkered floor. She approached a burly man with an earpiece, the tactical leader of her mercenaries. "Signal blocker activated." "Ma'am," the man reported, his gaze fixed on the ground. "No one can make an outgoing call. The police think it's a private, closed-door wedding. We have 15 minutes before Maxwell's external security protocol notices the anomaly." "I don't need 15 minutes, Genevieve hissed, looking towards the dark side nave where Lachlan had fled. "That idiot just discovered his dead wife breathes, but he has no exit. I want the girl. Bring me her head, or I swear to God yours will adorn the bonnet of my car. Understood?" While Genevieve sentenced her fiancé to death, in the sacristy, hell was a second from breaking loose. The thick cedar door finally gave way with an agonizing creak. The hinges sprang, and the splintered wood collapsed inward in a cloud of dust and old varnish. The hitman in the gray suit burst in with his weapon raised, scanning the darkness with a tactical flashlight attached to the barrel. But Lachlan wasn't there. A fraction of a second before the door collapsed, Lachlan's bloodied fingers had found the exact slot behind the immense tapestry of the Virgin. He pressed the carved stone with the full weight of his body. The wall groaned, a dull sound of colonial pulleys and counterweights that hadn't moved in decades, and a section of the stone wall slid inward, revealing an abyss of absolute blackness. Lachlan pushed Ruby into the icy gap and threw himself after her, dragging the tapestry to hide the opening. Just as the stone wall began to close slowly by inertia, the hitman's light beam swept the room and fixed on the moving wall. "They're here!" the assassin roared. The man fired. The silencer spat fire 3 times. The bullets impacted the stone milliseconds after the secret door clicked into its frame with a dull thud, sealing Lachlan and the girl in the cathedral's bowels. Lachlan felt stone dust sting his face in the darkness. They had escaped by a millimeter. They were safe from the bullets, but immersed in suffocating blackness. The air down here didn't smell of incense. It smelled of damp earth, ancient confinement, and death. These were the old catacombs, the service tunnels that connected the cathedral to the back laneways of Sydney's CBD. Ruby clung to Lachlan's leg, sobbing silently. The billionaire knelt, panting, and hugged her in the darkness. "It's okay, little one, it's okay," he whispered in her ear, though he knew it was a lie. It was just beginning. He turned on his phone's torch to the lowest possible setting. The pale cone of light revealed a narrow passage of exposed brick and low-vaulted ceilings. The floor was packed earth, slippery with centuries of dampness. There was no time to rest. Genevieve would find a way to open that wall. "We have to keep moving," Lachlan said, getting to his feet and taking the girl's hand. "I'm going to get you out of here. I swear it on my life, and then I'm going for your mother." They stumbled through the descending tunnel. The cold of the subsoil bit Lachlan's skin through his torn shirt, but the fury burning in his chest kept him warm. Genevieve, the woman who had slept in his bed, who had pretended to cry with him on the anniversary of Clara's death. Bile rose in his throat. He was going to destroy her. He was going to make her beg for mercy in front of the ruins of her empire. But first he needed an army, and he knew exactly who to call. The intimate enemy. Lachlan momentarily released Ruby's hand and touched the index finger of his smartwatch. The glass was chipped from the fall in the sacristy, but the screen still glowed with a bluish light. Cellular signal was non-existent at that depth, but the watch was connected to an encrypted military satellite, a luxury of extreme security that cost him millions a year. He tapped the screen 3 times, activating the Alcazar Corporation emergency protocol. The red channel, direct to the earpiece of Bruce Riley, his personal head of security, a former Special Forces operative who had been Lachlan's shadow for 5 years, the man who knew all his secrets and who swore to give his life for him. The line emitted a dull tone, bouncing off the satellites until it clicked. "Sir." Bruce's voice sounded tense, professional, filtered by the static of the subsoil. "We have a code red in the main nave. Armed men have blocked the doors. We lost visual contact with you at the altar. What's your status?" Lachlan let out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. Relief flooded him for a second. He wasn't alone. He had the best tactical strategist in the country on his payroll. "Bruce, listen to me closely," Lachlan whispered, continuing through the icy tunnel, illuminating the brick walls with his phone. "It wasn't an external attack. It's Genevieve. Genevieve orchestrated all of this. Her men have taken over the church. They have orders to kill me and a girl who is with me." There was a 2-second silence on the other end of the line, a silence that felt eternal to Lachlan. "Understood, sir?" Bruce replied with a strangely monotonous tone. "Proceeding to neutralize internal threat. What is your exact location for extraction?" "I'm in the old tunnels. I entered through the sacristy, behind the tapestry. I'm heading towards the north crypt, to the sewerage exit on George Street laneway. Move Alpha Team to that position. Get me out of here, Bruce. We have to go to the old Holloway Sanatorium on the highway. Clara." Lachlan's voice broke for a microsecond. "Clara is alive, and Genevieve has held her captive all these years." Another silence. This time it was denser. Lachlan stopped. Something in his instinct, the same predatory radar that warned him when a partner was about to betray him in a boardroom meeting. It lit up like an anti-aircraft siren in his brain. Through the tiny speaker of his watch, Lachlan heard a very faint, very characteristic background sound. It was the metallic click of a gold Zippo lighter opening and closing. Click, clack, click, clack. A nervous tick that Genevieve Holloway always made when she was anxious or about to make a lethal decision. Lachlan stopped breathing. The echo of the lighter bounced in the audio. Bruce wasn't on the external perimeter coordinating the police. Bruce was inside the church, next to Genevieve. "Copied, boss," Bruce said, and his voice no longer sounded professional. It had a dark, almost regretful nuance. "Alpha Team, moving towards the north crypt. Stay there. I repeat, stay in your current position. We're coming for you." Lachlan closed his eyes. The betrayal was a dagger twisting in his gut. Bruce, the man who had installed the security cameras in his house, the man who managed his vehicle routes. Bruce worked for her. Perhaps he always had. And she hadn't just infiltrated his bed. She had bought the person who was supposed to protect his back. The billionaire didn't say a single word. With a quick, violent movement, he tore the smartwatch from his wrist. The titanium strap ripped his skin. He threw the device onto the muddy ground and lifted his Italian shoe, crushing the satellite screen with his heel again and again, until the glass crunched. The circuits exploded, and the blue light died forever. He was left without a shield, without an army, without a tracker. He was a ghost underground. "Are the good guys coming?" Ruby asked in a whisper, looking at the remains of the shattered watch in the mud. Lachlan knelt in front of her, turned off the phone's torch. Darkness enveloped them like a shroud. Now he could only see the whites of the girl's terrified eyes. "No, little one. There are no good guys here, except you," Lachlan said, his voice distilling a pure, calculated hatred. "We've just been sold out. They're hunting us from both sides." In the distance, bouncing off the curved walls of the tunnel behind them, a sound chilled Lachlan's blood. The unmistakable sound of stone scraping against stone. Someone had discovered the sacristy mechanism. A powerful, blinding tactical light beam swept the blackness of the tunnel about 100 meters behind them. Accompanied by the light came the echo of rapid footsteps, military boots hitting the dirt floor. These weren't Genevieve's gray-suited thugs. That rhythmic, precise, lethal sound was Bruce's tactical squad. His own men were coming to execute him. "The north exit is compromised," Lachlan whispered to the girl, grabbing her in his arms again to prevent the sound of her bare feet from betraying them. "We have to go deeper." Lachlan turned right, leaving the main tunnel and entering an even narrower, darker bifurcation that stank of stagnant water. Sydney's underground labyrinth was their only chance. The billionaire, stripped of everything, his suit ruined and his heart pounding 1,000 miles an hour, plunged into the darkness, ready to become a beast to survive the night. The hunt had just reached his heels. Blind escape. The sound of tactical boots hitting the damp earth wasn't a distant echo, it was the heartbeat of death approaching from behind. Lachlan Maxwell could perfectly distinguish the formation of his hunters. As the man who funded that squad, he knew their tactics. They advanced in an arrow formation, sweeping every centimeter of the tunnel with high-penetration halogen flashlights, assault rifles pressed against their shoulders. They weren't coming to negotiate, they were coming to clean up Genevieve's mess. Lachlan pressed Ruby against his chest, feeling the girl's heart beat with the violence of a trapped bird. The stagnant water in the underground conduit reached their ankles. It smelled of sulfur, ancient mold, and putrefaction. The air was so thick that each breath required a conscious effort. But the billionaire didn't slow down. He advanced blindly, his free hand brushing the slippery stone wall so as not to lose balance in the absolute darkness. "Boss," Bruce Riley's voice traveled through the blackness, distorted by the tunnel's curvature, but laden with a chilling calm. "We know you took the diversion towards the old aqueduct. There's no exit that way. The grate on George Street laneway was sealed with concrete 3 years ago. You yourself approved the budget. Hand over the girl. I give you my word that her death will be quick and painless. Genevieve just wants the bastard." The word bastard bounced off the stone walls and dug into Lachlan's brain like a red-hot nail. The fury, a volcanic and primitive rage he had never experienced in any boardroom, injected him with a lethal dose of adrenaline. He didn't respond. Speaking would give them an acoustic target. Lachlan knew Bruce was right about the concrete. The contractor had sealed the main exit to prevent flooding. But what Bruce, the military strategist, didn't know was that Lachlan, the obsessive architect who reviewed every last plan of his donations, remembered an anomaly in the foundations. Halfway through the aqueduct was a Victorian maintenance vent, a wrought iron hatch that connected directly to the back alley of an old printing shop in the old quarter. "Hold on to my neck, Ruby, tight. Don't let go for anything," Lachlan whispered in the girl's ear, barely an inaudible thread of a voice a meter away. The girl obeyed, wrapping her thin, dry mud-covered arms around Lachlan's neck. The billionaire used both hands to feel the vaulted ceiling. The water now reached their knees. Rats squealed around them, fleeing the tactical lights that were beginning to paint the curved wall white behind them. They were less than 50 away. Lachlan's fingers, cut and bleeding from the fall in the sacristy, found the rusted metal on the ceiling. The hatch. "Light ahead! Possible visual contact!" one of the mercenaries shouted. A beam of light crossed the murky water, illuminating Lachlan's back for a fraction of a second. "Fire at will!" Bruce roared. The entire tunnel roared. The deafening blast of automatic, silenced rifles spitting lead filled the confined space. Bullets impacted the water, and stone mere centimeters from Lachlan's legs, raising geysers of rotten mud and splintering the centuries-old bricks. A fragment of stone bounced and cut the billionaire's cheek, but he didn't stop. With a guttural roar that tore his throat, Lachlan pushed the iron hatch upwards with both hands, using the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The 100-year-old rust creaked, the hinges groaned. The 50 kilograms iron plate barely lifted a few centimeters, letting in a thread of orange light from the streetlights. Bang. Another burst shattered the wall right next to his head. Brick dust temporarily blinded him. "Climb," he ordered Ruby, pushing the girl through the narrow gap he had managed to open. Ruby, agile and small, slipped through the opening like a frightened cat, scraping her arms against the rusted metal. As soon as she was out, Lachlan pushed his shoulders into the gap. The mercenary's tactical light illuminated him fully. "There he is! Don't let him out!" Lachlan propelled himself upwards with the strength of his forearms, just as a bullet grazed his calf, tearing his Italian suit trousers and burning his skin. He managed to get out into the cobbled alley, falling face down into puddles of accumulated rain. Without losing a millisecond, he rolled onto his back and kicked the heavy iron hatch with both feet. The plate fell with a massive metallic clang, sealing the hole just as a hand in a tactical glove tried to grab the edge. A muffled cry of pain was heard from below, and the sound of shots bouncing uselessly against the wrought iron. Lachlan didn't stay to check if the cover would hold. He grabbed Ruby's hand and melted into the shadows of the alley, leaving the underground behind and entering the urban labyrinth of the surface. Change of skin. Sydney's night air was dense, heavy with that hot humidity that presages a storm. The flickering neon lights of a closed bar dimly illuminated the narrow alley of the old quarter. Lachlan leaned against a crumbling adobe wall, breathing with his mouth open, trying to force oxygen into his burning lungs. He was shattered. The man on the cover of CEO magazine, the impeccable telecommunications and real estate magnate, had disappeared. His white shirt was a rag soaked with sewage water, sweat, dried blood, and black mud. His navy jacket was torn from shoulder to hip, and his face was crossed by a bleeding cut. At his feet, Ruby shivered with cold, clutching Clara's ring in her fist with a death grip. The wail of sirens cut through the night. From his position at the end of the alley, Lachlan could see George Street. It was plagued with red and blue lights. Armored state police vehicles surrounded the perimeter of the cathedral 3 blocks away. But Lachlan knew the truth. The police weren't going to save them. Bruce had contacts in all corporations. The authorities would believe the story of a failed terrorist attack and establish a cordon to protect Genevieve, while Riley's death squads would patrol the streets looking for him. "We have to go to the place with the cold walls," Ruby whispered, tugging weakly at Lachlan's torn sleeve. "Mum is waiting for me. She promised me she would hold on, but she's coughing up a lot of blood." Lachlan's stomach contracted violently. Coughing blood. Clara. His Clara, the brilliant woman with a booming laugh and green eyes who had taught him to love, rotting in the basement of the old Holloway Psychiatric Sanatorium on the Pacific Highway. The urgency hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. He peered around the corner of the alley towards William Street, 50 meters away. He recognized the silhouette of one of his own escort vehicles, a black Level 5 armored Suburban. The engine was running. A suited man with a transparent earpiece smoked, leaning against the bonnet, scanning the few pedestrians daring to walk there at that hour. It was a checkpoint. They were cornering him. Lachlan reached into his pocket. He still had the keys to his Mercedes AMG parked in the church's valet parking, his limitless black credit cards, and his crocodile skin wallet. He pulled everything out. The cards, the checkbook, his ID. He looked at the plastic and metal that dictated his power in the world. If he used a card, they would track him in 3 seconds. If he got into one of his cars, Bruce would turn off the engine via satellite and lock the doors. His fortune, at this precise moment, was worth absolutely nothing. It was a death trap. With a dry movement, he threw the credit cards and Mercedes keys into a nearby drain. He heard the splash of plastic falling into the dirty water. He took off his platinum Patek Philippe watch from his left wrist and put it in his pocket. That was cash, untraceable. "This way, close to the wall, no noise," he ordered, taking Ruby in his arms to move faster through the shadows. They moved stealthily through the backyards of old colonial houses, jumping stone fences, dodging broken bottles, and stray dogs that growled at them as they passed. Lachlan calculated every step with machine-like precision. He needed transport, something old, analog, no GPS, no onboard computers, something that government security cameras, which Bruce had access to, would completely ignore. Around a corner, near the Paddy's Markets area, he found his ticket out. In the loading bay of a dark fruit warehouse was a 90s Nissan Ute. The original white paint was devoured by rust, and the wooden tray was half-loaded with empty tomato crates. The driver, a young man in a dirty apron, was arguing heatedly on a flip phone on the opposite footpath, with his back to the vehicle. The Ute's engine was running. It coughed black smoke from the loose exhaust pipe, sounding like a teapot about to explode. Lachlan didn't feel a drop of remorse. He put Ruby down, signaled her to crouch, and ran silently, hunched over, using the engine noise to mask his footsteps. He reached the passenger door, opened it quietly, and helped the girl onto the broken vinyl seat that stank of stale tobacco and onions. Then he crept around the ute, crawling on the ground out of the driver's line of sight. He opened the driver's door and slid behind the steering wheel, which was sticky with grease. He put the gear stick into drive. The young man in the apron turned his head just as Lachlan floored the accelerator. The old ute roared, skidding its worn tires on the damp pavement. The young man yelled something unintelligible and ran towards them, but Lachlan swerved wildly, knocking over 2 empty wooden crates, and merged at full speed onto the dark avenue, disappearing into the late-night Sydney traffic. The hot wind whipped Lachlan's face through the missing window. The billionaire looked in the rearview mirror. No sirens followed him. The perfect camouflage, a rusty old heap lost in the immensity of the industrial city. Beside him, Ruby was huddled on the floor of the ute, hugging her own knees so no one could see her from outside. The orange streetlight flickered over her muddy face. Lachlan looked at her. The physical resemblance was so painful it stole his breath. Clara's nose, the stubborn way she pressed her lips. Ruby looked up and met the eyes of the man driving like a maniac. "You're my daddy, aren't you?" the girl asked. Her voice was barely a murmur over the roaring noise of the old engine, but it crossed the cabin with the force of a point-blank shot. "Mum told me not to be scared of you. She said, you had the saddest eyes in the world, but you'd defend me from the monsters." Lachlan felt his throat close. The tears he hadn't shed in 7 years, that he had forbidden himself since the empty funeral, burned the edges of his eyes. He gripped the cracked plastic steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The pain of the last 7 years condensed into a single instant of crushing clarity. Genevieve had robbed him of seeing his daughter's first steps. She had robbed him of hearing her first word. She had condemned him to an hell of solitude, while the love of his life breathed underground. Lachlan floored the accelerator, ignoring the red light crossing the William Street intersection. "Yes, little one, I'm your daddy," Lachlan replied, and his voice didn't tremble. It was laden with a macabre, cold, and absolute promise, and the monsters don't know what's coming for them. "Hold on tight, we're going to get your mother out of that hell." The glass prison. The old Nissan's engine spat a final puff of black smoke before Lachlan turned off the headlights. The darkness of the Pacific Highway swallowed them whole. To their right, hidden behind a curtain of black pines and wild undergrowth, rose the monstrous silhouette of the former Holloway family psychiatric sanatorium. There were no signs, no lights in the windows of the imposing brutalist concrete building, designed in the 70s and officially abandoned a decade ago. To the world, it was a dead block of cement. To Lachlan, it was the tomb where his life had been buried alive. The billionaire stopped the rusty ute behind an earthen mound 100 meters from the main entrance. The silence of the bush on the outskirts of Sydney was deafening, interrupted only by the distant chirping of cicadas and the agitated breathing of the girl beside him. "Listen carefully, Ruby," Lachlan ordered, turning to her with an electric intensity. "You're going to stay here. You're going to hide under the seat, pressed against the metal floor. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, you are not coming out, do you understand? If you see lights, close your eyes, don't make a sound. I'm going to get your mother, and I'm coming back for you. I swear it on my soul." The girl nodded, her eyes immense and bright in the darkness. Her small, dirty hands released the torn fabric of Lachlan's jacket. "Don't let the white lady hurt her," Ruby whispered, her voice broken. Lachlan didn't reply with words. He clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He grabbed a heavy, rusty iron wheel brace he had found lying on the ute's floor and opened the door silently. The icy air of dawn hit his wounded face. He slipped between the trees, moving like a vengeful ghost. His designer suit, now turned into rags, blended perfectly with the shadows. As he approached the perimeter wall, topped with barbed wire, Lachlan's hunter instinct sharpened. Genevieve wouldn't have left this place unprotected, not even on her wedding day. He peered through a gap in the brick fence. There was the first line of defense, a security hut, camouflaged under ivy. 2 men smoked cheap cigarettes, illuminating their bored faces with the intermittent ember. They wore dark tactical vests over civilian clothes and submachine guns slung around their necks. They were Bruce's mercenaries, the stragglers who had stayed guarding the cage while the others attended the big party. Lachlan tightened the rusted iron in his right hand. The Forbes-listed businessman had died at the altar. The man breathing now in the bush was a primal beast, ready to tear apart anyone who stood between him and Clara. He waited for one of the men to enter the hut to urinate. The other remained outside, kicking stones in the gravel, his back to the bush. It was a matter of 3 seconds. Lachlan jumped over the low part of the fallen wall, with feline agility born of pure adrenaline. He made no sound upon landing. He lunged onto the mercenary's back, before the man could take another puff of his cigarette. Lachlan's left arm closed around the guard's neck, blocking his trachea in a perfect, brutal chokehold. At the same time, the iron wheel brace struck the man's temple with a dull, sickening crunch. The guard collapsed like a lead sack without emitting a single sound. The second mercenary came out of the hut, zipping up his trousers. "Hey mate, where did you put the—" The words died in his throat. Lachlan was already in front of him. The billionaire charged with the force of a freight train, crushing the man against the armored glass of the hut. Lachlan's knee came up like a piston, shattering the mercenary's sternum. Before the man could raise his submachine gun, Lachlan snatched the weapon with a savage tug and delivered a direct butt stroke to his jaw. The crunch of bones filled the night. The guard fell unconscious into his own blood. Lachlan didn't stop to look at the bodies. He stripped them of a magnetic access card and a tactical flashlight. He checked the submachine gun's magazine, 30 hollow-point bullets. He took off the safety. The cold steel in his hands was comforting. It was the weight of justice. He crossed the central courtyard, running in a zigzag, dodging the rusted security cameras that, he knew well, were still operational. He reached the immense tempered glass doors of the main building. They were electronically blocked. He slid the blood-stained card through the reader. A green beep confirmed access. The doors hissed open pneumatically. The interior of the sanatorium was an architectural nightmare, the stench of stale industrial disinfectant, mixed with dampness and asbestos dust. It hit him like a slap. The corridors were endless tunnels of chipped white tiles. Rusted wheelchairs lay overturned in the corners like metal skeletons. Ruby's voice resonated in his mind. In the basement, no windows, just the ceiling light. Lachlan ignored the closed elevators. He found the service staircase door, kicked it open, and began the descent into the bowels of madness. Each step echoed in the concrete stairwell. 1 floor down, 2 floors, 3. The air became heavier, colder, more unbreathable. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees. He reached level -3, the deep subsoil, the psychiatric isolation area from the 1950s. The corridor here didn't have white tiles. It was blocks of gray concrete dimly lit by dying fluorescent bulbs that hummed like swarms of flies. There were a dozen heavy steel doors, without exterior handles, secured with thick electronic bolts. They were maximum security cells designed for violent patients. Lachlan advanced slowly, gripping the submachine gun. The silence down here was supernatural, heavy, suffocating. His steps crunched on a layer of dirty water and earth. The trail stopped dead, and he aimed the flashlight at the floor. There were footprints, small muddy tracks coming from a busted ventilation grate, near the floor, and leading towards one of the cells at the back. It was Ruby's escape trail. At the end of the corridor, cell number 7 had a red light on above the steel frame. It was blocked. Lachlan ran towards it, pressed his face against the small, shoebox-sized armored observation glass embedded in the center of the door. The glass was fogged from within. "Clara!" His voice came out as a choked scratch, a plea to God, to everything, to the universe. Lachlan wiped the fogged glass with the torn sleeve of his shirt and looked inside. The horror of what he saw froze his blood in his veins. The Phantom of Sydney. The cell was a bare concrete shoebox. There was no bed, only a stained mattress lying on the floor, under the dying light of a single bulb protected by a wire cage. In a corner, the earth was disturbed, concealing the broken pipe through which Ruby had escaped to the surface. And in the center of that gloomy tomb, chained by her right ankle to a heavy shackle embedded in the wall, was a woman. Lachlan let out an animal groan, stepping back, as if he had been shot point blank in the chest. She was facing away from the door, curled in a fetal position, wearing gray rags that hung from her skeletal body. Her hair, which Lachlan remembered as a thick black cascade that smelled of vanilla, was now a matted, dull, thinning tangle, falling over her bony shoulders. She was trembling uncontrollably, coughing with a wet, tearing sound that echoed in the concrete walls. "Clara!" Lachlan shouted, hitting the steel door with his bare fists. Ignoring the pain of flesh tearing against metal, the woman stopped coughing, became petrified. The sound of her name pronounced by that specific voice had not resonated in that dungeon for 7,000 days and nights. Slowly, with an agonizing slowness that demonstrated the extreme weakness of her atrophied muscles, she turned her face towards the armored door. Her green eyes were immense, devouring her emaciated face, sunken in dark sockets. She looked through the glass. Her pale, cracked lips trembled, opening and closing without emitting a sound. The shock on her face was absolute. She raised a trembling hand, covered in scars and dirt, as if she wanted to touch the apparition on the other side of the glass, as if she feared her broken mind was playing another cruel hallucination on her. Lachlan couldn't breathe. Hot, thick tears finally overflowed, sliding down his cheeks, mixed with dust and dried blood. "Get away from the glass!" Lachlan ordered her. His voice was now the deep roar of a predator. There was no time for tears. The hunt was coming for him. Clara understood. The instinct of survival shone in those green eyes. She dragged her chained body to the opposite corner, covering her head with her arms. Lachlan raised the submachine gun, aimed directly at the electronic lockbox embedded in the steel frame. He pulled the trigger. The deafening burst shattered the sepulchral silence of Level 3. Sparks, molten plastic, and steel fragments flew down the corridor. The electronic panel exploded, sending out blue sparks. But the master titanium bolt, designed to contain enraged psychiatric patients, was jammed. Lachlan kicked the steel door with all his might, the sole of his Italian shoe slipping on the metal. He kicked again. Pure rage injected him with inhuman strength. At the fourth impact, the shattered hinges gave way, and the heavy door swung inward with a screech of tearing metal bouncing against the concrete wall. Lachlan threw the weapon to the ground, lunged into the cell, falling to his knees in front of her. There were no words of love, no romantic movie declarations. Reality was raw, stank of sickness, earth, and confinement. Lachlan wrapped his strong arms around the fragile, malnourished body of the woman he loved. He felt every bone of her ribs under the ragged fabric. Clara clung to his torn shirt with fingers that seemed like desperate claws, burying her face in the crook of his neck. Her cry was not human. It was the silent howl of a soul that had been torn from hell. "I found you. I found you. I'm here, my love. I'm here," Lachlan repeated, frantically kissing her dirty forehead, her tangled hair, crushing his face against hers, feeling his tears merge with hers. "Lachlan," Clara sobbed. Her voice was harsh, broken by years of screaming in the darkness unheard. "Ruby, my girl, where is my girl? She's safe. She's outside. She brought me to you. We have to go, Clara. We don't have time." The billionaire looked down at his wife's ankle. The rusty iron shackle had bitten into her skin, leaving a festering, deep mark around the bone. The heavy steel chain was embedded in a forged ring in the concrete floor itself. There was no lock to shoot. It was a masonry job, made to be eternal. Lachlan sprang to his feet, grabbed the submachine gun from the floor, and used it as a lever. He inserted the thick barrel between the concrete ring and the first link of the chain. He braced a foot against the wall, tensed the muscles of his arms and back until he felt the fibers were going to tear. The metal of the weapon groaned, threatening to bend. "Now," Clara whispered, coughing blood into her hand. Her body trembled as she witnessed her husband's effort. "Genevieve took everything from me, Lachlan. Every night she would come down, stand there, and tell me how she kissed you, how she prepared her wedding dress. She forced me to look at photos of your wedding. The name was enough fuel." With a guttural roar that made the caged light bulb on the ceiling vibrate, Lachlan pushed down with blind, lethal force, born of the most absolute hatred a man could harbor. Crack. The concrete ring, corroded by years of underground dampness and overcome by the lever, burst. The chain was free, falling to the floor with a heavy clatter. Clara was free, but her body was broken. She tried to stand, but her legs instantly failed her. She would have crashed onto the cement floor if Lachlan hadn't caught her inches from falling. He lifted her into his arms as if she were made of crystal. Her weight was alarming. Genevieve had been methodically starving her, day by day, waiting for her to die on her own, so as not to get blood on her hands. "Hold on to me, I'm never letting you go again," Lachlan told her, resting Clara's head against his torn chest. He picked up the submachine gun with one hand, resting it on his hip. He carried her out of the cell and across the threshold into the dark corridor. Clara closed her eyes, unable to bear the faint light of the dying fluorescence, after so many years of perpetual darkness. But the victory of the rescue lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Just as Lachlan stepped onto the first concrete stair to begin the ascent to the surface, the sound cut both their breaths. It was the electrical hum of the main elevators coming to life. The same elevators Lachlan had seen closed off and dead in the sanatorium lobby minutes before. Power had been reactivated from outside. Lachlan looked into the stairwell. Through the open space rising 3 floors, he saw the relentless flash of tactical flashlights, penetrating the darkness of the upper level, bouncing off the white tiled walls. And then a voice traveled downwards, amplified by the echo of the stairwell. A woman's voice, crisp, elegant, sweet, and absolutely venomous. You thought it would be so easy, Lachlan. Genevieve Holloway's voice resonated, distilling a chilling cruelty. Go down. Block the exits. I want my best friend dead before she sees the light of day again. The elevator gave a dry chime, indicating its descent to level -3. The tactical lights began to descend rapidly down the stairs. They were trapped in a concrete shoebox, 50 m underground, with only one viable exit and an army blocking it. The nuptial ambush. The metallic chime of the elevator descending the concrete shaft was the sound of a guillotine falling in slow motion. The digital number on the wrought iron doors at the end of the corridor changed with torturous slowness. Level -1, level -2. Lachlan knew that trying to go up the main stairs was suicide. The assassins were already sweeping the upper steps, cutting through the darkness like white blades. They were trapped in a shoebox, 30 m underground, with only one viable exit and an army blocking it. Listen to me, my love, Lachlan whispered, pressing his forehead, covered in cold sweat and dust, against Clara's temple. The woman weighed so little in his arms it broke his soul, but there was no time for grief. I'm going to turn off the lights. I'm going to make a lot of noise. You have to cover your ears and not let go of my neck. No matter what you hear, don't scream. Do you understand? Don't scream. Clara, trembling from the supernatural effort to stay conscious, nodded weakly. Her hands, reduced to skin and bone, clung to the blood-stained fabric of her husband's jacket, with a strength born of pure terror. The elevator indicator marked, level -3, ding. Lachlan didn't wait for the doors to open completely. He raised the stolen submachine gun with his right arm, braced the stock against his hip to compensate for the recoil, and pulled the trigger. The deafening burst shattered the sepulchral silence of the basement. The hollow-point bullet swept across the main electrical panel embedded in the concrete wall to the right of the elevator, the same one that powered the corridor's emergency lights and the door mechanism. A shower of blue and orange sparks erupted in the air, followed by a dull explosion. Absolute darkness swallowed. Level -3 inches, a fraction of a second, just as the elevator doors jammed halfway open. Contact front. Suppressive fire. Bruce's unmistakable voice roared from inside the elevator. The entire corridor suddenly lit up, not with lamps, but with the strobe-like flashes of 4 automatic rifles firing blindly in the darkness. The sound was a physical hammering, an acoustic pressure that burst eardrums. Bullets impacted the concrete walls, chipping the centuries-old tiles and raising clouds of asbestos dust and fragments of hot lead that whistled through the air. Lachlan was no longer there. Taking advantage of the chaos and temporary blindness from the muzzle flashes, he had slipped to the left, crossing the corridor flooded with dirty water towards the abandoned hydrotherapy area. It was an immense, cavernous hall, full of old cast-iron bathtubs, covered in rusted porcelain and half-ruined dividing walls. He threw himself behind the largest bathtub in the deepest corner of the room, just as a stray bullet grazed his left deltoid. The billionaire stifled a cry of pain, clenching his teeth until he tasted blood in his mouth. The suit fabric instantly soaked with a dark, thick red. "Force that door open!" Bruce yelled. "Activate tactical lights. Sweep every inch." He couldn't have gone far with her in tow. The screech of forced metal resonated in the corridor. The mercenaries pushed the jammed elevator doors open and began to flood the basement. 6 high-intensity light beams cut through the blackness like fog lamps, casting monstrous shadows of the rusted stretchers and overturned wheelchairs on the concrete walls. Lachlan breathed through his mouth, panting silently, trying to control the sharp pain in his shoulder. Clara hid her face in his chest, coughing weakly. Each spasm in his wife's body was a countdown to death. Maxwell. Genevieve Holloway's voice floated down the corridor, slithering across the damp floor like a poisonous snake. It was a calm, sickeningly sweet tone that contrasted with the smell of gunpowder and blood. "Where are you, my love? Our flight to the Maldives leaves in 3 hours. You wouldn't want us to miss our honeymoon over this little misunderstanding." Lachlan peered a millimeter of his face over the edge of the rusted bathtub. The image he caught turned his stomach. Genevieve walked down the center of the corridor, flanked by Bruce and 2 heavily armed mercenaries. Her wedding dress, which hours earlier was worth a small country's budget, was now a nightmare vision. The white silk skirt was soaked with black water from the pipes, torn at the edges and stained with mud. The bodice was splattered with a drop of blood, probably from the guard Lachlan had massacred in the hut. But she walked with her back straight, chin held high, holding a silver semi-automatic pistol in her right hand, with the naturalness of someone holding a champagne glass. "Come out, Lachlan. Be a man for once in your life," Genevieve taunted, stopping at the threshold of the hydrotherapy room. Are you really going to die in a rotting basement next to that breathing corpse? Bruce made a tactical hand signal. Two mercenaries separated from the main group and began to advance, flanking the room, checking behind each half-ruined wall, dangerously approaching Lachlan's position. The billionaire checked his weapons magazine. He had perhaps 15 bullets left. There were too many of them. They were cornered, at a tactical disadvantage, outnumbered, and outgunned. One of the mercenaries kicked a rusted metal surgical tray that resonated with a terrible clatter. The man aimed his flashlight towards the corner where the cast-iron bathtub was located. The blinding white light hit Lachlan's face. "I've got them! Sector 3, behind the..." The mercenary couldn't finish the sentence. Lachlan sprang up like a spring, driven by pure fury, ignoring the fire in his left shoulder. He raised the weapon and fired a short, controlled burst of 3 bullets. The projectiles impacted directly in the man's chest and neck, throwing him backwards into a puddle of stagnant water. But by revealing his position, Lachlan sealed his fate. The other mercenary opened fire instantly, shattering the edge of the porcelain bathtub centimeters from Clara's head. Lachlan had to duck, covering his wife's body with his own, as a shower of iron and ceramic shrapnel rained down on them. "Cease fire! Cease fire, you idiots!" Genevieve shouted, raising her free hand. "I said I want to do it myself. I want to see her eyes when she stops breathing." The ceasefire was immediate, leaving only the echo of gunshots buzzing in Lachlan's ears. Suddenly, a deafening mechanical click shook the basement. Clack, clack, clack. Bruce had found the manual override switchbox for the emergency diesel generators. The enormous industrial lamps, embedded in the concrete ceiling, protected by wire cages, flickered twice before turning on with a brutal electrical hum. The hydrotherapy room lit up with a sick, merciless yellow light. There were no longer shadows to hide in, no more surprises. Lachlan looked up. Less than 5 meters away, in a perfect semicircle of death, stood Bruce and the 3 remaining mercenaries, pointing their laser-sighted rifles directly at his head. And in the center, walking slowly with the sound of black water splashing under her white heels, was Genevieve Holloway. The ambush had closed. There was no physical escape possible. The ace up the sleeve. The silence in the enormous concrete room was thick, interrupted only by Clara's hoarse, wheezing breath and the hum of the emergency generators. Genevieve stopped 3 meters from the bathtub where Lachlan held his wife's fragile body. The mud-stained bride tilted her head, observing the scene with a grimace of genuine disgust and sadistic fascination. "Look at her well, Lachlan," Genevieve said, her voice resonating in the tiled walls. "Look at what you've been crying over for 7 years. A wraith, a bag of dirty bones that smells of piss and sickness. This is the great Clara Beaumont, the woman you rejected me for at university, the brilliant architect you cast aside, leaving me the role of the spinster friend." Clara shuddered, clenched her skeletal fists against Lachlan's torn shirt. Her green eyes, sunken in their sockets, sought the face of the woman she once considered her sister. "You were my family," Clara whispered with a voice so fragile it seemed about to break like glass, saliva mixed with a trickle of blood at the corner of her lips. "I gave you the key to my house. I entrusted you with my pregnancy." And Genevieve let out a dry laugh, devoid of any human warmth. "And that's why it was so easy, darling, because you were stupid," Genevieve replied, pointing the pistol distractedly at the ceiling. "The day of the accident, when I stuck the sedative needle in your arm while we had tea, you didn't even blink. You trusted me until you woke up chained to that wall." The charred body at the bottom of the ravine was a work of art from the morgue my family controls. Bruce got the fake dental records. I made sure to cry louder than anyone at the funeral. Genevieve took a step forward, her dark eyes fixed on Lachlan, who looked at her with icy, silent hatred. "It was a perfect job, and the reward was even better," Genevieve continued, savoring each syllable. "For 7 years I slept in your bed, Lachlan. 7 years, managing 50% of your shares, building an empire, comforting you as you broke into pieces on the anniversary of her death. I was your lifeline, your goddess. We had everything, the world at our feet, and today at our altar, you had to ruin everything for a muddy brat who couldn't keep quiet." Lachlan didn't raise the weapon. He intentionally let it drop into the dirty water at his feet. The sound of metal hitting the tile made the mercenaries tense their fingers on the trigger, but no one fired. The billionaire knew that in a speed duel against 4 rifles, he was dead. He needed to use the only weapon the Holloways would never understand, the brain of a corporate and technological predator. He slowly leaned Clara's body against the cold iron of the bathtub and stood up, rising to his full height, despite the bleeding pain in his shoulder. The torn jacket, the stained shirt, the blood on his face, all disappeared before the aura of pure, dark, unbreakable power that the man emanated. "You talk too much when you think you've won, Genevieve," Lachlan said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was flat, deep, devoid of fear. It was the voice of the man who had destroyed monopolies and crushed his enemies in the boardrooms of Sydney. "It's your biggest flaw. You always need the audience to applaud your genius." Genevieve frowned, tightening her grip on her pistol. "There's no audience, Lachlan. It's just us. And in 5 minutes, you and your beloved wife will be ashes in this sanatorium's medical incinerator. Bruce, kill him first. I want her to see him fall." Bruce Riley raised his rifle, aiming directly at the center of Lachlan's forehead, but the billionaire didn't flinch. On the contrary, a smile, a grim, wolfish sneer, appeared on Lachlan Maxwell's cracked lips. Slowly, using only the index finger and thumb of his uninjured right hand, he reached into the inner pocket of what remained of his tailored trousers. He pulled out a rectangular object of dark glass and titanium, his personal mobile phone. The screen was cracked, but lit. "Did you forget what I do for a living, Genevieve?" Lachlan asked, raising the phone to his chest height. A small red light and a green microphone icon flickered incessantly in the upper corner of the broken screen. "I am the CEO of Maxwell Comms. I own 80% of the fiber optics in the north of the country, the low-orbit satellites, and the government encryption network. Did you really believe the man who built this damn country's communications network would enter his wife's tomb without life insurance?" Bruce minutely lowered the barrel of his weapon, panic piercing his tough military training. "What did you do?" Genevieve demanded, confidence fading from her face, replaced by a sudden, cold, stabbing fear. "The signal inhibitor is activated. You can't make calls down here. The walls are lead-lined." "You're right. A commercial phone wouldn't have signal in this bunker, but this isn't a commercial phone." Lachlan turned the screen towards them. On the fragmented display, the words "Direct Satellite Transmission Active" glowed red, along with a timer counting down 12 minutes and 40 seconds. 12 minutes ago, while you and your hunting dogs were coming down the elevator, believing yourselves to be the owners of hell, I activated the Corporate Override Emergency Protocol. It uses a military frequency band embedded in the hardware, immune to your little black market inhibitor toys. Genevieve took a step back, all color draining from her face. Her lips trembled. "It's a bluff. You're lying to buy time," she stammered, pointing the silver pistol at him, but this time her lace-gloved hand trembled uncontrollably. "A bluff?" Lachlan let out a dark laugh, a sound that bounced off the tiles and chilled the mercenary's blood. "Genevieve, you just confessed, in high-definition acoustic broadcast, to Clara's kidnapping, the staged murder, the charred body trafficked from the morgue by Bruce, the corporate fraud conspiracy to steal my shares. Absolutely every word, every detail of your damn villain monologue has been transmitted live in real time through an open channel." Lachlan took a step forward, shortening the distance to the weapons pointing at him, defying death itself. His gaze was liquid fire. "And you know who I transmitted it to," Lachlan whispered, his voice cutting the static air of the basement. "Not the local police you've bought, not your judges. I sent it directly to my board of directors network, to the Minister for Defense, to Interpol's headquarters in Canberra, and as icing on the cake, to the servers of the 5 largest news networks in the country simultaneously. You can't stop it, you can't erase it, and you can't buy off 500,000 people who just heard your confession." The silence that followed those words was absolute, the sound of Genevieve Holloway's empire crumbling to dust. Bruce Riley slowly lowered his rifle. The ex-military man knew exactly how Maxwell's military technology worked. He looked at Genevieve and then at the ground. He knew they were dead. Not physically, but legally, financially, absolutely destroyed. If he pulled the trigger now, it wouldn't be a covert homicide. It would be an assassination broadcast nationwide, and he would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security cell or facing a firing squad. "Bruce, kill him! Kill him! Right now! I order you!" Genevieve shrieked, completely losing her mind, panic distorting her beautiful features into a hysterical monster. She wildly waved the silver pistol in Lachlan's direction, but Bruce didn't move. Instead, he took a step back, separating himself from her. The mercenaries exchanged looks of pure terror under their balaclavas and instinctively lowered the muzzles of their submachine guns. No one was going to sink into the abyss for a lost war. The ace up the sleeve had been played. Lachlan Maxwell didn't need to fire a single bullet to annihilate his enemies. And just at that instant, as if to confirm the sentence dictated by the billionaire, a distant, sharp, multiplying sound began to filter through the reinforced concrete ceiling from the surface world. It was sirens, not one or two. It was dozens of sirens, Military convoys, federal patrols, and news helicopters, converging on the sanatorium grounds on the Pacific Highway. The whole world had just heard hell, and the whole world was coming to break down the doors. Lachlan slowly put his phone in his pocket. He looked at Genevieve, whose armed arm trembled directionlessly, her breathing ragged, her eyes wide with the madness of imminent defeat. "It's over, Genevieve," Lachlan pronounced with the coldness of a judge executing a sentence. The fire lied, but the satellite transmission didn't. "Welcome to your own glass prison." The last veil, the howl of sirens, ceased to be a distant echo and became an acoustic drill that made the foundations of level -3 vibrate. The noise of heavy engines, the screech of tires braking suddenly on the gravel outside, and the unmistakable beating of helicopter blades, cutting through the night wind, filtered through the ventilation ducts of the abandoned sanatorium. The red and blue strobe lights of dozens of federal patrols and military vehicles began to project ghostly flashes through the ceiling grates, tinting the dirty water of the hydrotherapy room with the colors of absolute condemnation. Genevieve Holloway, the Ice Queen, the architect of Sydney's most atrocious high society lie, was crumbling in real time. The mask of sociopathic control she had maintained for 7 years, fractured into 1,000 pieces under the relentless yellow light of the emergency generators. Her breathing was an erratic wheeze, an animal gasp. The perfect makeup that should have graced the cover of Sydney's society magazines was smeared with sweat, dampness, and tears of pure fury, scarring her emaciated face like black streaks. She looked at the cracked screen in Lachlan's hand, where the red satellite transmission counter continued to run, relentless, unstoppable, testifying to her madness before the entire world. The Holloway Empire, forged over decades, had just been reduced to radioactive ashes in less than 15 minutes. Her shares were worthless. Her name was synonymous with monster. "It's a lie!" Genevieve shrieked, with a high, tearing voice that hysterically bounced off the broken tiles. "It's a corporate trick. You're bluffing, Lachlan. The inhibitor works. Nothing got out of here." But Genevieve knew the truth. The terror in her own mercenaries' eyes confirmed it. The battalion landing over their heads confirmed it. She was finished. A spastic tremor ran through the armed arm of the woman in the wedding dress. Her knuckles turned white as she clenched the grip of the silver semi-automatic pistol. If she was going to sink into the abyss, she wasn't going alone. If the throne was lost, the king and queen would burn with her. "If my empire falls, you won't enjoy the ashes." Genevieve roared, twisting her torso with desperate violence. She didn't aim at Lachlan, the man who had just destroyed her. She aimed directly at the fragile, malnourished chest of Clara, who was still clinging to her husband's torn jacket on the edge of the iron bathtub. Genevieve's finger, with its white porcelain nail, tightened on the trigger, but the shot never occurred. A brutal, swift, and devastating impact struck Genevieve's wrist before the firing pin fell. It wasn't Lachlan. It was Bruce Riley, the ex-military man, calculating his own survival with the coldness of a cornered fox, had made his decision. He wasn't going to die for a deranged woman, nor was he going to add a first-degree homicide in front of a national audience. With a precise tactical movement, Bruce struck Genevieve's armed arm with the heavy barrel of his assault rifle. The bride's wrist bone cracked with a dry sound, and Genevieve let out a shriek of pure agony, dropping the silver pistol which fell into the stagnant water with a dull splash. Before she could react, Bruce delivered a kick to the back of her knee, forcing her to fall face down onto the broken tiles, completely ruining what was left of her French silk dress. "Game over, boss," Bruce growled, stepping with his heavy military boot on Genevieve's back to hold her against the icy ground. He looked up at Lachlan, lowering the barrel of his rifle in a gesture of unconditional surrender. "You win, boss. I'll testify. I'll give the Attorney General all the offshore accounts, the morgue locations, the bribes to judges, everything in exchange for partial immunity. I didn't kidnap her. I only covered it up. You know I'm pragmatic." Lachlan didn't respond to his former security chief's negotiation. He didn't care about Bruce's immunity or the offshore accounts. His only universe at that instant was the woman trembling in his arms. At that precise second, the jammed elevator doors were blown to pieces by a controlled breach charge. The explosion shook the entire basement, filling the corridor with gray smoke and the smell of burnt gunpowder. "Federal police, weapons down, hands on your heads. Now, now, now." A voice roared through a megaphone, followed by the deafening tramp of 50 tactical boots flooding level -3. Dozens of red laser beams from assault rifles swept the hydrotherapy room, pointing at Bruce, the frozen mercenaries, and the fallen figure of Genevieve Holloway. Lachlan used his body as a shield over Clara, raising his right hand, the one holding the phone, as a signal to halt. "I'm Lachlan Maxwell," the billionaire bellowed, his voice broken, imposing himself over the chaos of the operation. "The shooters have surrendered. Lower your weapons and bring paramedics. My wife is dying. I need oxygen right now." The tactical squad leader recognized the magnate instantly. The operation shifted from assault to rescue in a blink, as federal agents violently subdued Bruce and handcuffed a screaming Genevieve Holloway, who shrieked hysterical incoherencies about weddings and betrayals, dragging her through the mud of her own dungeon. A team of military paramedics burst into the room with rigid stretchers and oxygen tanks. "No, don't touch me! Lachlan, don't let them take me!" Clara sobbed, panicking at the sight of strangers approaching her. Her mind, traumatized by years of confinement, couldn't process freedom. Her skeletal hands dug into the flesh of her husband's chest. "I won't let go. No one is taking you anywhere without me. I'll carry you. I'll get you out of here," Lachlan swore to her, ignoring the pain of the bullet that had grazed his shoulder, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt and the physical exhaustion that threatened to make him faint. Lachlan gently pushed the paramedics aside. With infinite delicacy, he lifted Clara into his arms. She hid her face in his neck, closing her eyes tightly. The ascent from hell was a surreal parade. Lachlan walked, flanked by heavily armed soldiers, climbing the concrete ramp to the surface. With each step, the air became lighter, losing the stench of dampness and asbestos. When they finally crossed the tempered glass doors of the sanatorium and stepped outside, the magnitude of the operation hit them. The Pacific Highway was closed. There were at least 50 emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, and black government vans. Above, 3 helicopters with searchlights illuminated the surrounding bush as if it were daylight. Behind the police cordon, a legion of journalists, television cameras, and mobile units broadcast the climax of the news that had paralyzed the entire country. The fall of the Holloways, the resurrection of Clara Beaumont. Cameras desperately pointed towards the main entrance as the imposing but shattered figure of the magnate emerged from the trees carrying his wife. Camera flashes erupted like a storm of white lightning in the Sydney night. Reporters shouted his name, demanding a statement, seeking the scoop of the decade. Lachlan didn't look at any camera. His face, stained with blood and mud, was a mask of absolute concentration. He didn't stop at the intensive care ambulance with its doors open, waiting for them. He walked past, ignoring the police commander's orders. He walked directly towards the edge of the bush, towards the darkness where the lights didn't reach. There, hidden behind an earthen mound, was still the old, rusty Nissan Ute. Lachlan reached the passenger door. His heart pounded wildly. Very carefully, he supported Clara on her own feet, holding her firmly by the waist so she wouldn't collapse, and with his free hand, he opened the rusted metal door which creaked in the night. The interior of the cabin was dark. "Ruby," Lachlan called. His voice, which had roared death threats minutes before, was now a warm, trembling whisper full of devotion. "You can open your eyes now, little one. The monsters are gone." From under the broken vinyl seat, covered in dust, dry mud and tears, a small head of dark curls peeked out. The girl's immense green eyes shone, reflecting the distant lights of the patrol cars. She saw Lachlan first, and then her gaze dropped to the fragile figure he held. Clara let out a muffled cry, a sound that tore the souls of all present. It was a cry that contained 7 years of agony, of prayers in the darkness, of paralyzing fear. "Mom!" Ruby cried. The girl leaped out of the ute like a spring, ignoring the stones that cut her bare feet. She threw herself against Clara's legs. The mother fell to her knees on the gravel, not caring about the physical pain, and wrapped her skeletal arms around her daughter. The two merged in a desperate embrace, crushing the girl's mud against the mother's gray rags. They cried, shouted each other's names, kissed each other's faces, touching as if they needed to confirm that the other was real and not a ghost spawned by the madness of confinement. Lachlan fell to his knees beside them. His enormous arms encircled the 2 women of his life, creating a physical barrier against the outside world, against the lights, against the cameras, and against the past. He buried his face in Clara's hair, brushing his daughter's forehead. And for the first time since the nightmare had begun 7 years ago, the ruthless billionaire allowed himself to weep with absolute, heartbreaking vulnerability. They were 3 survivors emerging from the ashes. The silver ring, deformed by the false fire, hung from the girl's neck, glowing faintly under the moonlight, marking the end of the lie and the beginning of life. Epilogue. 1 year later, the spring sun beat strongly through the immense windows of the Maxwell mansion, located in the exclusive hills of Mosman. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and gardenias, an absolute and intentional contrast to the confinement of the past. Lachlan stood on the marble terrace, dressed in a white linen shirt and casual trousers, holding a steaming cup of coffee. His face had lost the stony tension that characterized him for almost a decade. The scars on his hands were the only physical reminder of the night that changed everything. He looked towards the immense gardens of the property. There, running behind a golden retriever puppy, was Ruby. She wore a bright yellow dress, clean shoes, and her dark hair fell in a cascade of loose curls that caught the sunlight. Her loud, contagious laugh filled the valley. There was no longer any trace of the terrified, mud-covered girl. She was a happy, radiant child who had just learned to read and who dominated the entire house with her stubborn character. Sitting on a picnic blanket under the shade of a century-old oak was Clara. A year of physical therapies, medical interventions, specialized nutrition, and intensive psychological support had worked a slow but sure miracle. Although still thin, she had regained the glow in her skin. Her dark hair had grown back healthy, framing that face Lachlan never stopped loving. She wore a light dress and was drawing in a sketchbook, slowly resuming her old passion for architecture. Clara looked up from the paper, and her green eyes met Lachlan's on the terrace. She smiled at him. It was a calm, honest smile, free of shadows. She raised her hand, showing him a new platinum ring that sparkled on her ring finger right next to the old, rusted chain she refused to take off her neck as a symbol of survival. Kilometers away, in the federal maximum security women's prison, Genevieve Holloway faced her second week of life imprisonment without parole, stripped of her surname, her fortune, and her sanity. Locked in a 3x3-meter cell, condemned to live in the same hell of cold walls she had designed for her best friend. The world had forgotten her. Lachlan left the coffee cup on the terrace table, ran down the stone steps 2 at a time, and raced into the garden towards his wife and daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that no corporate merger, no $1 billion in the bank, and no glass empire was worth a single second of the sun that now caressed his family's faces. Yeah,